Hi, I'm Lloyd. We're here at the Colorado Learning Center of Human Anatomy, and I'm here with Andrew again, and we're going to be talking about the lower extremity today. We have a few interesting things to see here. We have the hip replacement that we're going to be talking about a little bit, and we also have a few points about this that relate to sports and athletics. But let's look at the basic movement. When we're talking about the lower extremity, we have to talk, just like we did with the arm and the shoulder in our last video, then we are also going to talk about the hip and the pelvis. And this is going to be talking about the ring that forms in the trunk of the body. And this brings us back to the idea that the human body is built in segments. And so just like you can see beautifully defined here on the abdomen, the chest, we've got segments of the body coming all the way up. That's the way we're built. And so this ring, just like you'd see on an earthworm, we've got that in our own body. And so this ring of the pelvis is what forms the basis of the trunk. That is like the core of our core. And so we start here is the lateral or the side, the right pelvic bone. It also has a couple other names. We could call it the os COXAE, or we could call it the innominate. And that's just a fancy way of saying this is a bone that we're not going to name. So, weird. But the innominate bone is actually an irregular bone, or we could call it a flat bone by the ilium here. The ischium here is where we sit. This is actually what we're sitting on, and it's got some muscle there. And then the pubis, the pubic bone's right here. This pubic joint is still intact, and that's going to be just right centered above the genitalia. So if we look at movement, the hip is a ball and socket, just like the shoulder, and we're going to see that it's really well able to do this nice little flexion. It's able to extend, not as well as it flexes, but then it's also going to be able to come out. And we can rotate it while we're out there in all those, yep, all that beautifully. So that little frog leg movement right there. And so also the knee, we can bring the knee up and flex and extend. Really get those high kicks for the dancing. And we can also see a little bit of rotation at the, yep. And so the rotation at the hip here will perform that, but then also at the ankle. So if we see that little raise and lower, and then we can also do that little curling in and out. So let's take a look at what this means in terms of how things are built. We see this ball and socket. This is really deep. This is one of the most difficult joints to dislocate, and thankfully. This and the elbow, two very difficult joints to dislocate. But as we see with the surgery, this was actually an anteriorly placed surgery, and so the ball and socket are completely synthetic materials. We have this titanium and surgical steel here, and then we have the plastic products that are inside to recreate the ball and socket of the hip. And not as good as the factory spec, so what we're born with is usually ideal, but the replacements, tougher. You'll see some of these are made out of ceramic, which are just as good. The problem is the ceramic parts, they do occasionally, they're not really given to athletes because under high pressure and impact, they will shatter and shrapnel like a grenade in there. Yeah, not a good thing. So what we see here is the pin will actually be driven down. This basically is like driving a railroad spike into the top of the femur, putting it into the shaft. They actually use the same power tools that you use to build a house when they do these surgeries. It's pretty brutal to watch, but it still works really well. Okay, so we've got the pelvis, part of the girdle to hold the hip in place. We have the femur now is this long bone, two heads and a shaft. And then now as we get to the knee, what we see here is at the knee, we've actually got a special bone, and this is the patella. It's a sesamoid bone, and so it actually doesn't attach directly to another bone. It glides over the front of the humerus. It glides over the top of the femur. And so it glides right over that slot. Now, what the patella or the sesamoid bone is good for, patella or the kneecap, this is a really good thing for, it protects the front of the joint because of that range. It's exposing the joint a lot. We can actually see, here's the ACL in here, the anterior cruciate ligament. This forms a cross, just like that, right? And so we see that cross. That ACL is what gets torn when people do that twisting move on the field and try to evade tackle or going for kicks on the soccer field. So what we see is this patella is really well situated to protect the joint. It works really well for if we're kneeling or crawling, or if we're trying to place the knee into somebody else's body parts. So we see that it actually has a really thick sheath of tendon and cartilage that attach it down to the next bone, the tibia. And so the tibia is what you think of when you think of your shin. And that's conveniently, there is no muscle here at all. And when I say conveniently, that's because that's exactly what we're going to use to find furniture at night in the dark. So as we're walking, boom, that's it right there. So on the outside, we see the fibula. It's a very thin bone, and it actually attaches to the tibia here and down here. And so, as you can see with Andrew, as he's tightening up there and does a little bit of a calf raise, you can kind of see, see that muscle definition? That's the fibula right there, going down. And so what we get, same thing here, we don't have it in place, but the interosseous membrane holds it just like it does in the forearm. This is built a lot the same. And so we see evolutionarily, it developed really as flippers that just got longer and longer. So now into our extremities. We see the fibula also gives us a little bit of rotation here at the ankle, just like the radius gives us rotation in the forearm at the wrist. And now the feet, we have 7 bones, which we won't be able to see very well here, but we will see them good on our model here. And so we have 7 bones that make the ankle. And the ankle, as Andrew's standing, is really going from the base of the lower leg down into the arch of the foot. 7 bones, those are all short bones. And that's including our heel, or the calcaneus. Now, as we look at this movement, this is really good for hinge movement, and the rotation really is coming from the arch. But we see the same arrangement, 5 bones, starting with number 1, the metatarsals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that's what makes the arch of the foot. Technically, these are called the rays. If you think of the calcaneus as a sun or a light source, and then the rays of the foot would be the metatarsals coming out as that same like sun-like arrangement. And now we have the same thing in the toes. Each toe has phalanges, the small but still considered long bones because they have 2 heads and a shaft. The idea that we have 2 phalanges in the big toe and then 3 phalanges in the other toes. And just like we did with the arm, let's do the math. Because what we're gonna see is the same thing, arrangement 2, 3, 3, 3, 3, 14 bones in the toes. And then we have 5 metatarsals, so 19. But now we only have 7, so that's 26 bones instead of the 27 in the hands and wrists. So 26 bones plus 2 more, 27, 28, 29, 30, we made up for that loss in the ankle by having an extra at the knee. So same number of bones. in the lower extremity as we had in the upper extremity. And so that's going to cover our skeleton. And thank you very much. Come back for our next video. We're going to be looking at the muscle structures in the extremities.